We begin the day in the nightmare that is the reality for thousands and thousands of people in and around Houston, Texas. Tropical storm Harvey has now moved on, but any comfort is being quickly washed away. In some areas, the record flooding contaminated city utilities. There is no clean drinking water for the 120,000 residents in Beaumont, Texas, for example. And at a chemicals plant near Houston, blasts were heard today, part of a toxic chain reaction triggered when the floodwaters knocked out electricity at the plant. Now, among these new dangers, the calls for rescues are not diminishing. In a moment, we'll talk about how big data, smartphones, and smarter Samaritans are helping to locate people and save lives. We start on the ground, where water is being replaced by fire.
Fires and explosions rocked the Arkema chemical plant northeast of Houston. The facility lost power in the storm, knocking out equipment needed to cool volatile chemicals. Residents from the town of Crosby were evacuated from round the plant.
They said it was going to blow up. They said the plant was going to blow up because the electricity, they didn't have no electricity, and the machine was going to blow up.
The emergency authorities are warning fumes from the explosions could be dangerous.
The question is whether or not we can actually get in and assess the full scale of the impacts from an environmental standpoint to infrastructure standpoint. So those are ongoing. We do what's called plume modeling, and that's what we base a lot of the evacuations on. And so by all means, yes, the plume is incredibly dangerous.
The rain has stopped in Houston and the floodwaters are slowly receding. The search for the missing continues. But stories of dramatic rescues are still emerging. Workers spot a man in trouble in fast-flowing floodwaters. He's pulled exhausted from the torrent. Neighbours at this building in Houston formed a human chain to help a pregnant woman onto a rescue truck. She gave birth to a baby girl on Monday. Residents of this nursing home in Orange, Texas, had been waiting for days for rescuers to arrive. Others were not so lucky. 6 members of one family died when their van was swept off a flooded highway. The death toll is certain to rise as authorities and residents take stock of the damage.
Well, I'm joined tonight by Frank Billingsley. He is the chief meteorologist at KPRC-TV in Houston, Texas. Frank has weathered many a storm and many a hurricane there near the Gulf. Frank, it's good to have you on the day. What are you telling folks in Houston tonight when you give the forecast, Frank? Are you telling them that the worst is behind them?
The worst is behind us in terms of weather. We've had Harvey go to the Tennessee Valley area, which means we are actually experiencing a north wind, which for us means low humidity, and that's rare in August for us. So that's nice. And the people that are cleaning up and trying to get back to normalcy, at least have some nice weather. It's sunny outside, the humidity is low, and it's going to continue to be fairly nice right into our weekend, which of course is our Labor Day weekend. Monday, we start to pick up a chance of rain. And there is some possibility, Brent, that we're going to see some sort of tropical system develop just to our south in what we call the Bay of Campeche, which is part of the Gulf of Mexico. If that develops, and even if it doesn't develop very strongly, but if it's a low-pressure system moving toward us, that would mean more rain. And I have that in our forecast for next Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, a big cold front is expected to move through here next Wednesday, which would take all of us out of here. But we've got to look for some rain on Tuesday, Wednesday before that front gets here. And of course, all eyes on the Atlantic because of Irma, which is now expected to become a Category 4 hurricane in the Atlantic. That same front that we're looking for on Wednesday should be on the East Coast Friday and pick Irma up and protect the East Coast. But that's a ways off, and that's a distant forecast. So all eyes on the Atlantic. For us, all eyes on the Gulf.
Frank, let me just ask you, people all around the world, they're watching this story unfold where you are, and they're asking, how can the U.S.'s 4th largest city, the American petroleum capital, a mecca for air conditioning, which sits on the coast, how can it be in the 21st century so vulnerable to a hurricane? What's your answer?
They are few and far between. Flooding is not. The last time we had a big storm like this was in 2001 with Tropical Storm Allison. Before that, we had flooding with Carla in 1961. We did have Claudette in 1979, Amelia in 1978. So they're generally speaking, decades between these kind of events. People forget. People get on with their lives. They say, you know what, at the end of the day, probably less than 10% of the people in Houston were affected directly in terms of their homes being flooded. There were cars that were flooded, but of a 6 million person area, right now we have 19,000 in shelters, and then we're going to have certainly 100,000 people affected by this. But I think what happens is we say, well, we're going to get on with this, and we go on to the next thing. This one, to your point, Brent, is so large. I don't think we can just ignore it and say, well, okay, let's hope and keep our fingers crossed next time, and now at least we'll know what to do next time. I think we're going to have to take steps to remediate this kind of flooding in the area, because it really brings, as you say, the fourth largest city in the United States to an absolute standstill for days. There are as many Fortune 500 companies here as there are in New York City.
Right.
This is a huge economic place for the United States. All of the petroleum, huge amount of it, comes into the Gulf of Mexico and then is pipelined elsewhere into the U.S. Those refineries, those pipelines are in jeopardy when we have hurricanes like this. As you know, there are places in the Netherlands where they built huge dams, places in Japan, huge dams. There's been talk here about doing some of that, which would prevent storm surge, but that would not prevent 50 inches of rainfall, and that's what we had. I was here Saturday. I watched the rain gauges, 5 inches of rain, and you'll have to do the math to millimeters for your European viewers, but 5 inches of rain per hour. How many millimeters? 5 inches of rain per hour, Brent.
Yeah, I mean,
per hour.
Right. I mean, these are biblical.
50 inches.
Yeah, they're biblical proportions. These numbers. But you've had storms before, not as bad as Harvey, but you've had storms before that have been bad, and there has been discussions there in Houston about building some type of dike system, dams or something to protect the city, but it never has happened.
Well, it's going to take federal money, and we're many states, and you build a dike system for Texas. Well, now Louisiana, where's my dike system? And now Florida, where's my dike system? And let's go up the East Coast, where's my dike system? So we're not like a country where it's one country that you're trying to protect with all these different states. That's the problem. We have so many different states that have so many different opinions about this. That there's probably, first of all, not enough money to protect the entire United States from this, because you'd have to go throughout the Gulf Coast and at least up to Massachusetts on the eastern seaboard. But there's going to be a lot of different questions about, well, this is you're doing this for hurricanes that come every now and then, that is spending trillions of dollars. But what are you going to do about my earthquake? What are you going to do about my tornadoes? What are you going to do about my avalanches?
Well,
we get more weather than any other country in the whole world.
Yeah.
China's second, but we're first.
Let me ask you,
we get it all.
The New York Times today had an article, and I think the headline was Hurricane Harvey could change Texas forever. The Texas mentality could be changed because people will have to learn to rely on each other more. I mean, how do you see that as someone who lives there? Is this going to change the way people live and look at each other?
I'm not sure I quite understand that headline or that sentiment, because if you haven't seen the tweet from Michael Berry of a long line of people, and it said, this long line of people, what are they in line for? Food, gas, water. It was volunteers. They're here to volunteer. And so they weren't there for any kind of a handout. There was a long line of people that wanted to volunteer. We have what's called the Cajun Navy that came in from Louisiana just to help. We have everyone with a boat is out there helping other people. Everyone with a rake or a saw or a hand is at their neighbor's house helping them repair from floods. So volunteerism and the spirit of helping each other has always been part of these problems. Whenever we're down in Houston, we help each other. Texas prides itself in the fact that we don't have handouts. When we had Hurricane Ike in 2008, Brent, that was the same weekend that the Lehman Brothers had their bankruptcy. That was the same week that the stock market tanked in the United States. Yeah. And nobody came to help us. Everybody was worried about that. Nobody cared about Texas or what had happened with Hurricane Ike. So we had to step up, and we had to repair Galveston and Bolivar Peninsula and Houston. And we were without power for 3 weeks, no electricity. And so we've been through having to step up for each other, and we know how to do it, and we do it without even asking a question. We're just there, and we have it from the beginning.
Well, Frank, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and giving us insights, too, not only into what a meteorologist sees there in Houston, but also someone who lives there and is a part of the community. We certainly appreciate those insights. Frank Billingsley, the Chief Meteorologist at KPRC-TV in Houston. Frank, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brent.